to the freedom issues. It's freedom and security of the net, never security without freedom, that will take us backwards in a global situation where the possibilities of taking us forward are perhaps unprecedented in human history. Thank you.
Exposition. You've heard so far from three figures from government in different ways, but this conference, of course, goes far beyond governments, and our next speaker illustrates that very well. He's Jimmy Wales. He's the co-founder of Wikipedia. He's going to talk about innovation and access to information. Wikipedia was launched 10 years ago. He became its promoter and spokesman. He was named in the Time 2006 list of the world's most influential people, and I'm sure that is still true in 2011. So please welcome Jimmy Wales.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. So it's easy to listen to some people who are scaremongers about the trolls, about internet piracy, and come to the conclusion that something must be done. And there is truth to that there are needed reforms that we have. But I believe that the greatest threat to the freedom and prosperity that the internet can bring is not cyber criminals, but rather misguided and overreaching government policy. One thing that I see again and again is that policymakers have not absorbed or even understood the lessons that we have learned so far, particularly the lessons of community control and peer production as embodied in Wikipedia. So I wanted to bring in some of that so that we can think a little bit about some of the policy questions in a new way, in a different way, and to realize that the people of the internet, the people who are building the internet and all of the great resources on the internet, actually have a great deal of knowledge about how to solve certain kinds of problems, and we can learn from that and realize that government control is probably not the best answer. So how does Wikipedia work? I think, let's just take a quick count. How many people here have used Wikipedia? I just did that for fun. But how many people have edited Wikipedia? No, that's actually pretty good. It's always surprising to see which audiences are editing Wikipedia a lot and which are not. One of the interesting ones, I was in Mumbai and I gave a speech to the IIT Mumbai, which is a large technical university, 5,000 students in the audience. I would say about 80% of them raised their hand that they had edited Wikipedia. This generation of people who come up really understand these technologies and really understand how to build things. So how does Wikipedia work? Anybody can edit. You don't even have to log in. You just click on edit and make some change. But if you do log in, you begin to build a reputation. You have an identity on the site. People begin to know who you are. It doesn't have to be your real name. It can just be any login name. And it's not that we're particularly secretive about real names, but it's just not a concern for us, the real names of people. If you misbehave in Wikipedia, you will very quickly be blocked from editing, and your bad contributions will be deleted. So who does that? How does that process happen? Well, we have administrators, and the administrators are elected by the community. They're people who have shown over time that they adhere to the principles of the site, that they are kind and thoughtful people. They become elected as administrators, and then they have certain technical abilities to block people from editing or to lock a page temporarily if there's some kind of a problem, and to delete things permanently if necessary. So these admins are empowered with a lot of power. It's sort of amusing sometimes to think about the sheer size of the audience for Wikipedia. The audience for Wikipedia in a given month, about 420 million people view Wikipedia. So this group of administrators, which is just a few thousand people worldwide, are in their own way some of the most powerful media barons that have ever lived. They control what kinds of things are allowed in Wikipedia, what kinds of things are not allowed. And yet these admins, the rules for the admins are very much like the rules for police in a democratic society, meaning that, yes, they do have certain powers, but they can only go so far, and all of their things, all of the actions that they do are subject to community scrutiny. And if they don't follow the rules of being an admin, they can be removed as an admin. And so the admins aren't allowed to tyrannize the site, and there's a whole set of procedures and processes to create that kind of community control. At a higher level, if there's a more complicated conflict, we have the arbitration committee. The arbitration committee, again, is elected from the community. In the English arbitration committee, we have 15 members who come from different places all around the world. And the arbitration committee, once they're elected by the community, then they're formally appointed by me, which is something that I think the Brits will understand. That I have sort of a role that's sort of like the UK monarch, meaning I don't really have that much power, but I get to stand and wave at parades a lot. So. But we do have this very formal structure, which has grown organically over time to resolve problems. So people wonder, well, what do you do if somebody's putting bad information? How do you determine this? How do you do all that? Well, it's all through this very complicated social process of discussion, dialogue, debate, and so forth. So what is the result of this? So on the site, some of the core policies, which have always been very fundamental to Wikipedia and very fundamental in its success and its popularity with the general public, are things like neutral point of view, the idea that Wikipedia should strive to be as neutral as we possibly can. We don't take political stances. We don't allow people to come with an agenda to push a particular political agenda or any other agenda within Wikipedia. We want to be neutral. Now, of course, being neutral is very difficult. We haven't discovered any magical solutions. I'm not the new Aristotle. We do know that people get the idea of neutrality, though, and they work very hard to achieve it. We have principles within the community like assume good faith. If you see someone doing something bad in Wikipedia, rather than yell at them or assume that they're malicious, assume that they're trying to do something useful. That's the first step. We extend this even so far as if someone vandalizes Wikipedia, so you go to a page and you insert some curse words, typically the first response that you will get will be someone saying, thank you for your test of Wikipedia, but you really shouldn't put curse words in articles. And if you're testing the software, go over here. There's a page where we allow you to do that. And if you'd like to help contribute, here's some of the things you might want to think about doing. So that kind of assume good faith really does help, not only in the cases of random people causing trouble, but also when we have a huge debate or a discussion within the community. There is this core value in the community of saying, actually, we're all here for a charitable purpose. We're all here to share knowledge with all of humanity. Let's try to work together. Let's assume the best of each other and try to find a way forward that is rational and involves compromise on all sides. Another of our principles in this area is no personal attacks. We don't allow within our community the kind of trolling attacks that can be so much trouble in many places on the internet. If you come into Wikipedia and you start calling people's names or insulting people, the administrators will block you very, very quickly. And a lot of people do get blocked for this. Usually you get blocked for about a day the first time, and you get a message saying, hey, you can't call people Hitler, that's not nice. Come back when you calm down, and we'll talk about this. And finally, another principle, and remember, all of these principles are not imposed top-down. These all are generated within the community. Well, some of them have been around from the very, very beginning, and others have been modified and developed over time. Another one is the concept of reliable sources. If you want to write something in Wikipedia, you need to have a source for it. And we have long discussions and many, many pages of policy and guidelines on what counts as a reliable source. In different contexts, it might be a different thing. If you want to write about some very technical topic in medicine, you should probably have a peer-reviewed academic journal and not a popular newspaper. On the other hand, if you're writing about something that would be well covered in a popular newspaper, that can be an acceptable source. When can a blog be a source? That's a very complicated topic, but it's one for which our community, after a very long period of time, now 10 years, has come together and really worked on a lot of guidelines that if you read through them, you might disagree with one point or another, but you have to say, wow, these people have really put a lot of thought into this. So what does this lead to in practice, and how do we interact with the rest of the world? And I want to bring this back a little bit to government policy by talking about how we interact with some government policies. One of the famous cases here in the UK, there's been a lot of press coverage about super injunctions. These are cases in which people get a court order that forbids newspapers from publishing a certain story. And one of the things that happened earlier this year is suddenly on Twitter, someone posted a whole bunch of information from these super injunctions and basically leaked information that they weren't supposed to be publishing. So what happened at Wikipedia? Did we immediately put all that stuff into the article, or did we decide to obey UK law? Well, as it turns out, we obeyed UK law, but only accidentally, because we really think it's a very bad law, and it's not that interesting to us to just obey laws of places that have laws limiting the freedom of speech. However, the community said, wow, you know, someone unknown posting some random commentary that's quite inflammatory about certain people on Twitter doesn't prove that any of it's true, and we need a reliable source. And so all of that information about the footballers and the this and the that was kept out of Wikipedia for several days until there finally began to emerge reliable sources for it, and they were broken in the UK press as well. Another interesting thing that happened recently is the Italian Wikipedia decided that they would go on strike for 2 days against a proposed law in Italy which would have restricted their freedom of expression and the ability to write Wikipedia in a neutral fashion. This was unprecedented. We had never done anything like this before, and it was incredibly a big success. Within 24 hours, they were amending the law, and the entire thing was shelved after it was realized that it was so incredibly unpopular online. I mean, you don't want to pass a law that takes away people's Wikipedia. They get very angry. So that was quite effective. But we see all the time these kinds of laws. So in the US today, there is a lot of news beginning to emerge about Stop Online Piracy Act, which is a new law, which is worse than the one in Italy, and is really, really badly designed. And the interesting thing about this sort of thing is, when we think about stopping online piracy, I think most people would agree that's a good idea. Not everybody would agree that, but most people would say it's a good idea. But attempting to stop it by using measures that are clearly going to negatively impact the ability of Wikipedia volunteers to write in a neutral and honest and truthful way about things in the world is a really bad idea and a really dangerous precedent. And so I think that it's very important, as we try to resolve some of these things, is to realize maybe there are better ways than to rely on government control and top-down control, because we do have these mechanisms in the community to solve all kinds of problems in very interesting ways. Thank you.
Well, a fascinating contribution there from Jimmy Wales, showing how it is possible to create responsibility on the internet without government intervention and regulation, and indeed in a way that could not be devised or policed by governments. And moving on from that, building on that further, we're going to hear from a leading user of Twitter from the Arab world. Atif Al-Wazir is a Yemeni activist and researcher, and one of Yemen's best-known users of Twitter. We talked earlier about the importance of social networking in events in the Arab world. Yemen is a country that has sadly experienced a great deal of turmoil in recent times. And through her English language blog, A Woman from Yemen, she has become extremely well known. So I'd like to invite her to address us next.
Good afternoon, everyone. A while back, I stood face-to-face in front of an armored vehicle, and my hands were shaking, and I was able to snap that photo, which I later uploaded. And since that day, I thought to myself, I will never, ever feel intimidated again. Today, I'm proven wrong, sitting in this distinguished panel, but I will try to overcome that fear. As a blogger and activist and researcher, I rely heavily on internet, especially since the start of our peaceful movement in Yemen and in the Arab world. So I will try to summarize some of the successes that we think we find with the internet and social media, along with some of the challenges or fears. I'll start with the idea that the internet has really served to break the fear and the silence. There's something strange about being behind a computer screen. You feel a sense of security, you feel able to communicate. A professor of mine in class once took us to a computer lab and asked us to just engage in the same discussion we were engaged in inside the classroom. But what we found out was that more people actually were engaged in that discussion than people that were inside the classroom, because they felt freer in a sense to talk. And that's the same idea behind being